just gonna die in the end. Okay, guys, here we go with part 2 of the Rauha prologue reading. For any of you who have just stumbled upon this video, this is a reading of a book I've written. It's the prologue to an entire series called Rauha. The Rauha prologue book is available at Amazon. I will put the link to the book in the description. I will also put the link to part 1 of this reading in the description as well, because this will take us right to the end of the Rauha prologue. Once again, just making these to get the story out there more, see if you guys really like it. I'm trying to figure out going forward how I'm going to divide my time, and I'd really like to work on finishing the first book in the Rauha series, which I'm about a third of the way through, but it's going to require obviously a decent amount of time to get it completed. So again, check out, if you haven't already, check out part 1. Let's go to the conclusion of the prologue to Rauha. It had been over 4 years since Dr. Waters had shown up at the front door of the orphanage to tip off the Angelus family about the visit from the mysterious security people. From that point on, Deanna and Armand had been particularly protective of Alex. The rumor mill over the past few years had been rife with stories of the government arranging to have people with mutated abilities disappear. As far as anyone in the tight-knit little community that the orphanage was a part of knew, these were just unsubstantiated lies. But Armand, Deanna, and the whole neighborhood that had become close to Alex were not going to take any chances. As far as Alex himself, everyone did an admirable job of not alarming him. They were very careful to allow him to live his childhood without fear of something bad happening. They took those fears upon themselves and protected the young man. Whenever Alex was doing pretty much anything, going to school, playing with the neighborhood kids, or any other childhood pastimes, someone was always covertly keeping an eye on him. As far as Alex's abilities, his strength continued growing, but never once was he ever not completely in control of it. It also seemed that he had developed a sixth sense, the ability to predict the future. In many situations, Alex had been able to react to something that hadn't yet happened. He was also always extremely keenly aware of his surroundings. It seemed as if nothing, not the smallest, most insignificant detail, ever escaped him. On a beautiful summer evening, a gentle breeze from the distant ocean ushering in a welcome cooling from the day's heat, Deanna and Armand sat on the porch of the orphanage. Most of the kids were inside, playing together. A now 13-year-old Alex was running around the neighborhood with friends. They found a family of rabbits in the grass next to their homes. The kids gently approached the rabbits, who seemed unfazed by the proximity. Alex sat down, and the smallest of the bunnies gently moved towards him. The young man picked a couple blades of grass and held them out to the innocent little animal. The rabbit happily climbed onto Alex's lap and chewed on the grass. As parents began calling their kids back to their homes, Alex and his friends bid one another and their newfound rabbit friends good night. Alex then ran for his own home. As he saw his mama and papa on the porch, he smiled and ran up to sit with them. The exhausted young man plopped down, sprawled on the porch. "Oh man," he said, "I'm beat." "Yeah, it's tough getting old," Armand baited him. Armand and Deanna just chuckled. For several moments the three of them were blissfully quiet, each enjoying the evening in one another's company. As Alex looked up into the night sky, he became thoughtful. For a young man, he was very astute. "Mama Deanna, Papa Armand," he began, "why do I have special powers?" The adults looked to each other with concern. This was a topic they had touched upon with Alex, but he was understandably very curious. They tried to approach these conversations by making Alex understand he was different in his own ways, but his differences were no more concerning than anyone else's. "Well, Alex, like we told you, after the final war, some people developed some things that made them special," she explained to him in a calm, happy tone. "It's just something unique to you, something that makes you who you are." "I get that part," Alex said. "But why me?" Again, the adults took a moment before answering, carefully considering how to approach this. Hard to say, pal, Armand began. But you're not alone. I think everyone thinks why me sometimes about things about themselves. Even you? Alex asked. Absolutely, Armand reassured him. I mean, I look in the mirror every day and think, why did I have to be this ridiculously good looking? It's not fair to the other men in the world. Alex laughs. Deanna just rolls her eyes. Then the mirror responds by laughing hysterically and throwing up, Deanna explained to her son. Alex loved this type of interaction with his folks. After a moment, Armand became a bit more serious. You want to know why I honestly think you have these abilities? He asked the young man. Yes, Papa, Alex responded, his interest piqued. Because you can handle them, Armand explained in a confident, admiring tone. Your awesome physical strength and other abilities you got from the results of the war are cool, but they're not the most special things about you. Alex was confused. What is then? He asked. Deanna knew exactly what her husband was alluding. Your heart, she told Alex, the loving smile of a mom on her face. What makes you so special is not that you have the ability to move a mountain. It's that you have the ability to gently hold a baby bunny. I like that, Alex said with a big smile. After a moment, though, his smile dimmed a bit as a thought hit him. If anyone ever tried to hurt you guys, though, I don't think I could be gentle anymore. The parents, knowing of Alex's ability for sometimes seeing into the future, were a bit taken aback by this sudden change of the direction of the conversation. They quickly covered up that feeling. Well, we don't need to worry about that, pal, because no one is going to try to hurt us, Armand reassured him. Come on now, let's go back inside and have a snack before bed. The trio got up and headed indoors. If only things could have played out the way Armand had predicted. It was only a few weeks later when the caravan of vehicles showed up in the orphanage's neighborhood. At this point in society's redevelopment, cars were not commonplace at all, so several of them arriving at one time was cause for immediate attention. Faces popped up in windows and adults came out of their homes throughout the neighborhood. From each of the 8 cars that had invaded the area popped out 4 men dressed in suits. They looked unsurprisingly like the men who had shown up at the hospital after Alex's visit. The well-dressed army set out in a military style, with several men creating a perimeter around the orphanage as 4 of the patrol headed for the Angeles' front door. Inside the house, Deanna and Armand had already taken notice of the activity as kids played in the background. Pure terror came over Deanna's face as she saw the men heading up their walkway. Armand, what's going on? She asked in a harsh whisper, not wanting to frighten the kids. I'm not sure, Armand said, his eyes never leaving the approaching men. Get the kids upstairs. I'll handle this. Deanna masked her concern and called to the children to follow her upstairs for some game time. As the kids made their way up and out of earshot and sight of the front door, the suited men knocked. Armand took a look back to make sure the kids were gone and opened the door. Armand Angeles, a man who is obviously a leader, asked. Yep, what can I do for you? Armand asked, using a tone meant to be non-confrontational, but not showing any type of fear. Do you have a young man named Alex living here? About 13 years old, the boss queried. Now Armand's concern really ratcheted up. He did his best to maintain his composure. I'm not comfortable giving out information to strangers on any of the kids here. Who exactly are you? He asked. We're from the government, the man responded, pulling a badge out of his pocket. No disrespect, Armand began, but that badge doesn't mean anything to me. I don't know what a government badge would look like, and I certainly don't know why the government would be sending a platoon to our house. As the conversation was taking place, neighbors were coming out of their houses, getting as close to the orphanage as the line of suits would allow. The government boss was getting agitated. He tried to keep the emotion in check, but it was obvious from his tone he was becoming irate. Listen, we're not here to harm anyone, he explained. We have some information that young Alex may possess some unique abilities, and it's imperative that we simply meet with him so we can determine that he doesn't pose anything of a threat." "I'll vouch for him," Armand responded. "He is of no threat to anyone. He's just a kid who's had a very tough life trying to enjoy his remaining childhood." "Okay, your vouching for anyone aside, we still need to meet with the boy," the boss stated, his voice no longer hiding his irritation. "I'm sorry," Armand began, bracing himself, "but that's not going to happen." "Well, actually it is," the boss explained. "Apparently it's just going to happen the hard way." With that, he nodded to the flunkies who had accompanied him onto the porch. Two of the men each grabbed one of Armand's arms and pried him out of the doorway. Armand immediately began trying to fight back, but the men were quite powerful. "Let me go," Armand demanded. "You stay away from Alex." Seeing what was taking place, the crowd surrounding the area began shouting and trying to break through the perimeter to help Armand. The suited guards were able to hold them back, at least for the time being. As Armand struggled to keep the men out of the house, the other officer, who wasn't holding one of Armand's arms, sucker punched him in the face. Blood immediately began streaming from Armand's nose, but he continued struggling. Then things got real. Alex had gotten past Deanna and saw what was taking place from his vantage point at the top of the stairs. "Don't touch my papa!" he screamed, and in an instant he flew down the stairs and directly at the man who had delivered the punch. "Alex, no, come back!" a terrified Deanna shouted from her child-protecting stance at the top of the stairs, but it was already far too late. Alex shoved the puncher and flew him a solid 50 yards through the air, his body crashing into the side of one of the cars, the impact actually crushing the door away from its hinges. The two men holding Armand released him and attempted to grab the young man. It didn't work out well. As they reached for him, Alex took each of them by the wrist. He spun his body around in a couple of 360s and let them fly. They both outdistanced the first guy, landing in broken heaps in front yards down the block. The boss took out a sinister-looking retractable nightstick and snapped it out to full extension. He cautiously circled with Alex. "Stand down, kid," he directed. "I don't want to have to hurt you." Rage from having seen his Papa Armand assaulted had completely overwhelmed Alex. He sneered at the man and said, "Go ahead and hurt me. Let's see how that works out for you." Deanna had run out onto the porch. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. "Alex," she sobbed, "please stop." The young man turned to his beloved adopted mom. "But they hit Papa Armand," he explained, not wanting her to think less of him for hurting these men. In a display of incredible cowardice, the government boss took the opportunity of distraction to approach Alex from behind, and he swung the nightstick at the boy's head. Deanna shrieked in terror, but Alex had already sensed the man's movements. Without even turning to face his attacker, Alex put his arm above his own head. The nightstick struck his forearm, and with a huge cracking sound, the weapon snapped in half. The platoon had been briefed about Alex's abilities, but even at that, they had underestimated him. The boss backed away from Alex, who had turned his attention back to him. The guards who had set up the perimeter now ran in unison to back up their boss, brandishing their nightsticks. Armand charged to Alex's side to face off against the government agents. Several of the neighbors also joined Alex and Armand. The two sides stared each other down. "Okay, stop," the boss commanded. "We're not going to hurt the boy. We simply want to understand his powers and learn from them. We'll return him home after that." "Bullshit," one of the neighbor men shouted. He turned to Armand. "Don't buy it, Armand. They're going to make Alex disappear. We've all heard about the things they're doing to survivors with special abilities." "That's garbage," the boss yelled. "It's nothing more than rumors and conspiracy theories. That has never happened, nor will it now." "Then just leave," Armand told him. "There's nothing you need from Alex. Leave us alone." "I'm sorry," the leader said, although he didn't sound remorseful. "We can't do that." "He's not going with you," Armand informed the agent, unwavering. The neighbor standing with him nodded their agreement. The government man nodded. He then motioned to his men to move forward. Again, the battle was engaged. Alex immediately dove in and began throwing agents around. Their blows, on the rare occasions they could land one, had no effect on him. One of the agents cracked one of the neighbors with his weapon, sending the man to the ground, his head badly bleeding. Then a shot rang out. Everyone froze. One of the agents was actually brandishing a gun he had just fired into the air. All the emerging nations of the New World had emphatically agreed to one thing: no guns. They all believed that firearms had been the beginning of the end for humanity the first time around, and they weren't going to make that mistake again. Apparently, these particular agents had no respect for that agreement. Using his blinding fast speed, Alex charged to the gun-wielding agent and ripped it from his hand. In the same motion, he threw the man four houses down the block. Armand and everyone not from the government was stunned and sickened. "You pieces of shit," he bellowed at the boss. Armand lunged forward and delivered a hard right to the man's jaw. The agent went down and the other agents converged on Armand as the neighbors re-engaged the battle. In the midst of all this, Alex was becoming overwhelmed. Everything seemed to be taking on a surreal look to him. It seemed like a bad dream. He looked down at the gun in his hand. He snapped it in half and dropped it on the ground. Things were seemingly moving in slow motion for Alex. He wasn't even hearing the noises of the battle. He looked at the men wrestling on the ground and saw combatants from both sides landing blows. Many of them were bleeding. Alex then looked over to the porch of his beloved home. Some of the children from the orphanage had come outside, and Deanna was huddling with them, trying to block them from seeing what was happening as she sobbed. At that moment, Alex came to a decision. "Stop!" he shouted at the top of his very powerful lungs. His shout had actually shaken the ground. The fight immediately halted as everyone looked towards him. He looked longingly at Armand, then lovingly to Deanna. "I'll go with them," he said. "Alex, no!" Deanna shouted, still protecting the other kids. Armand ran over to his son and hugged him. "No, Alex," he begged. "We'll fight for you. They're not taking you." "It's okay, Papa Armand," Alex said, his voice resigned and determined. "They just want to check me out. I don't want anybody else to get hurt." Several of the neighbors rushed to the porch of the orphanage and took over caring for the kids so Deanna could run to her family in the street. She hustled to them and hugged Alex along with Armand. "We can't trust them, Alex," Armand explained. "You're our son. We need to keep you safe and with us." Demonstrating unbelievable maturity, Alex slowly shook his head from side to side. "Remember what you told me, Papa? I have these abilities because I can handle them. I've got to do that now. People are getting hurt. Look at Mr. Nakamura over there. He's bleeding." Alex pointed to one of the neighbors who had been fighting to protect him. An elderly man with Asian features was being tended to by other neighbors. "They have no right to take you," Deanna pled with her son. "We'll fight them." Alex again shook his head. "No, Mama Deanna. They won't stop until they get me, and lots of people will get hurt. I'm scared they will hurt you and Papa. Even if we make these men leave, they'll come back with more." "I'll be okay." Tears streamed down both Deanna and Armand's faces. The family held one another as tightly as they could. Armand put his hand to his son's face and looked him in the eyes as if he were trying to imprint the image onto his memory forever. Deanna kissed Alex on the head several times. Finally, Armand stood up and addressed the boss of the agents. "If you take him, I'm going too," he demanded. "That's not possible," the boss said, shaking his head. "Then he's not going," Armand fired back. "If you assholes think I'm just going to stand here and let you—" Alex touched his papa on the arm and interrupted his sentence. "Papa, I'll go alone," he said. "Mama and the other kids need you. I'll be fine." Armand was tortured. He knew that Alex was right, that Deanna and the other children needed him to be with them. Very reluctantly, he nodded his acceptance. Armand then made a beeline toward the boss, who took a defensive stance as Armand reached him. Alex's dad got nose to nose with the government troll and spoke in a determined, matter-of-fact tone. "If he doesn't come back, I promise you, absolutely guarantee you, that I will find you and kill you." For just an instant, the boss actually looked shaken. He quickly covered up that emotion and signaled to his men that were still able to function to come and take Alex. One of the agents had a medical needle in his hand. He approached Alex as Deanna finally released her embrace of him. "I'm just going to give you a little shot to help you relax," the agent said in a fake, soothing tone. "No," Deanna shouted. "You don't give him any types of shots or medicine. You said you wanted to talk to him and learn about him. You don't need to medicate him." She turned her attention to Alex and looked him right in the eyes. "Alex, if they try to give you a shot or any pills or anything, I want you to fight them. Do whatever you need to do to stop them, even if you have to hurt them badly," she instructed. "Do you understand?" "Yes, Mama," Alex replied with a smile. "You guys get that?" Armand asked all the agents. "You try and stick him with a needle and you'll all be going home in body bags." After having witnessed the carnage Alex was able to easily inflict on all of them, this was a very sobering thought. The agent put the needle away and led Alex to one of the cars. The young man paused before getting in the back seat. He forced a smile at his parents and waved. They, too, held back their tears and waved back. "See you soon, pal," Armand said. Alex nodded and got in the car. The other agents loaded their wounded into the other vehicles and they all drove off. This was the last time Deanna and Armand would ever see Alex. Immediately after Alex had been taken away, Deanna and Armand went to the hospital to seek out Dr. Waters. Their hope was that maybe he knew something about what was going on. They reached the hospital's front desk and asked if Dr. Waters was on duty that day. The nurse explained that the good doctor had left the hospital a few years prior. Nobody knew where he was. In the months that followed, Deanna and Armand did their best to carry on for the benefit of the other children at the orphanage. Their beloved Alex had left a permanent hole in their hearts and minds, though. The couple had taken to spending their free time together hiking. Being alone in nature's beauty somehow seemed to help them feel a closeness to Alex. One day, while on an extended hike, maybe by chance, possibly by design, they encountered a bearded man who seemed familiar. It was Dr. Waters, looking rough and rustic. The answers he gave them to their many questions were not heartening in any way. The doctor had left the hospital after a few more visits from men in suits following his tending to survivors with special abilities. Those survivors were never seen again. Dr. Waters explained how the consensus among healthcare providers was that the government, and the president in specific, had a policy of eliminating anyone with abilities who might pose a threat to those in power should public opinion move against them. Dr. Waters had challenged some of the suited agents on this issue. This did not sit well with them, and it soon became apparent that he was being watched. The doctor was given some insider information from a friend in a governmental capacity that he was soon going to be joining those who had exhibited special abilities. Being a single man, Dr. Waters decided his best bet was to simply slip away and live off the land. At one point, Armand looked the doctor in the eyes and asked point blank, "Do you think there's any chance that Alex is still alive?" Dr. Waters struggled to even speak for a moment. Then with tears in his eyes, he said, "I want so desperately to tell you yes, but I can't." This was the information Armand needed to set in his mind what he needed to do next. Daniel Barrow wasn't a hard man to find. As a squad leader in the government's highest-ranking security detail, he felt pretty much invincible. This invincibility led him to be rather carefree with the details of his personal life, as he felt untouchable. After a couple months of tracking, Armand located Daniel and verified that he was, indeed, the boss on the mission that took Alex. Daniel Barrow's face was one Armand would never be able to forget. For several weeks, Armand followed Daniel from the shadows. He learned everything about his daily routine. A less arrogant security agent would know very well not to develop any predictable habits. Unfortunately for Daniel, Arrogance was something of which he had vast reserves. It was a Tuesday evening. Daniel's garbage was picked up by one of the few trucks in service to the local community on Wednesday morning. Daniel came out of his house with a couple bags of refuse. He walked towards the dirt path behind his house, which served as the pickup point for the sanitation detail, and placed the bags on the ground. The same way he had for every week that Armand had been watching him. This Tuesday evening's trash takeout, however, was not going to be an uneventful household chore for the security boss. As Daniel bent over to place the bags on the ground, a simple brick from a local construction site crashed down across the back of his head. Everything went black. As Daniel's eyes slowly opened once again, his vision was blurry, and what he could see had a distinct crimson hue. He sat up and the pain shot through his head. He reached back to feel the open gash the brick had created. Panicked, he looked around. He realized he was sitting in the gully across the way from where he left his garbage. As he began trying to get back to his feet, a foot planted against his chest sat him back down. Daniel looked up into the eerie blank stare of Armand. Instead of rage, Alex's dad had an expression of dead emotion. He had cried so much over losing his boy that there was no more tears left to be shed. Now, he was simply taking care of a final piece of business on Alex's behalf. "Hi, Daniel," Armand said in a monotone. "It's time for you to die." Terror set in for the security agent. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa," he cried. "What's going on? Who the hell are you?" "Don't recognize me, huh?" Armand said in a mocking tone. "Not surprising. I'm sure a complete scumbag like you has plenty of people promising to kill you." Daniel's mind was whirling, trying to piece this information into the puzzle. After a moment, his expression showed he understood who was standing over him. "Wait a second," he pleaded. "Your kid, it wasn't me who wanted to take him. I was just taking orders from the president himself." Armand calmly nodded. "Oh, okay, gotcha. Kinda sucks for you then that you are so good at your job, and that you seem to enjoy it so much." Armand kicked Daniel in the face. Two of the security boss's teeth found their way to the grass of the gully about 5 feet from where Daniel's head slammed against the ground from the force of the kick. Groaning in pain and gasping for air against the blood filling his mouth and nose, Daniel tried to crawl away from his attacker. "Please, man," Daniel begged appropriately enough, like a frightened child. "I was just following orders. I'm sorry." Armand stalked the bleeding man. "I didn't think I could respect you even less, but you proved me wrong. I had actually at least thought a tough guy like you would go out defiantly, not crying like a little bitch." Armand jumped on top of Daniel. The brick and the kick had beaten down the government man so much he was basically defenseless in a fight. Armand got to Daniel's back. In a sitting position, he wrapped his legs around the squad leader's waist and wrapped his left arm around his neck. Daniel gasped, struggling for air. "Time to go," Armand emotionlessly informed him as he took a long ice pick from his pocket and placed the tip against Daniel's jugular vein. "Wait, please stop," Daniel begged. "You don't understand. Your kid's not dead. He's hiding somewhere." "Really?" Armand asked, his tone indicating that he was well aware that this was nothing more than an attempt by Daniel to save his own life. "Yes, really," the security man continued. "If you let me go, I promise I'll help you find him. I promise." Armand thought this over for a few seconds, then he chuckled. "You know, for just a moment I had thought about not killing you. Just leaving you here in a puddle of your own piss and blood. But now, since you decided to try and use a lie about my son to save your own life, you've sealed your fate." "It's not a lie," Daniel protested, crying. "I swear we can find him." "Shut up," Armand bellowed. He paused for a moment, letting Daniel continue fearing his fate. "The thing is, I lied. I never really considered not killing you." The blood exploded from Daniel's neck as Armand plunged the ice pick as deep as he could force it. Armand released Daniel's lifeless body and watched him roll face down into the gully. Alex's dad calmly got to his feet and began the journey home. Armand and Deanna huddled together in their bed, holding each other as closely as they possibly could. They knew it was just a matter of time until Armand was taken away for avenging Alex. The notion made them sad, but not remorseful. It had to be done. Armand was never taken. He was not even questioned about the incident, even though what he had done was pretty much common knowledge throughout the community. Armand and Deanna liked to think that somehow, cosmically, it was Alex that was inexplicably protecting his parents. They believed that until the day they died in that same bed together, many years later, from natural causes. The whole incident with Alex had blown the cover off how the government was eliminating innocent people with special abilities. Prior to Alex's abduction, the stories had been little more than hearsay. With the large number of people who had witnessed that day's events, there was no doubt left. The treatment of survivors with special powers triggered uprisings against the government. Some of them became bloody. Seeing this, a small band of survivors and their loved ones found their way to a previously unexplored island, working in concert with those fighting for the rights of the special people to get all those in danger of being eliminated to the island and safety. There were many stories of heroism and bravery as this island haven was settled and defended. It became a place where those whose abilities were a result of humanity's inhumanity could escape persecution by that same ruling class of humanity. Those that settled this island created their own nirvana. They could live the way they wanted, in peace. As they built their community, a plaque was placed in the center of their town square. Engraved on the plaque was one word: Alex. This island became the paradise that survivors and their families so richly deserved. Their way of life was peaceful and family-oriented. This existence was the absolute antithesis of the horror and fear that had preceded the apocalyptic war and the terror of life immediately following the fighting. The one caveat to which all the settlers agreed was, regardless of who tried to take them away from their special place, regardless of what type of forces would try and change their way of life, they would die before they would allow their island or their ways to be stolen or influenced. As is the proven nature of humankind, unfortunately, there would be many challenges to this declaration. Welcome to Rauha.